Hello students! Today we're going to be talking about Palestine and Israel. We're going to be listening to a presentation by Russell Brand, who is interviewing Gabor Maté. I'm going to let them talk, but first I want to draw your attention to two quotes that come out of this that made me think about veganism and how everything is related to the animals and their own suffering, and how we must unite to stop the suffering of all sentient beings on the earth. One of the quotes that Gabor will say, you will hear him say, if it's not what you know, it's what you could know if you wanted to. Now with that quote, I want you to think about the amount of people that know about some kind of suffering that goes on with the animals, but they're too afraid to watch the important documentaries like Dominion Movement or Earthlings. They think they know, and so they say, it's not that bad what the animals are going through. You know, they just have a quick death. But they are too afraid to actually look. Just the same way that many people knew what was going on with the Jews, but were too afraid to look. They knew something terrible was happening, but they were too afraid to go in there and to save them. It was far easier to just look away and pretend like nothing was going on. Now, I often bring up the Holocaust to explain what the animals are going through now, to try to make the link with people that if we think that the Holocaust was a terrible thing, and it was, then we must end the suffering for the animals now. If we don't believe that the Jews should go into gas chambers, then we also should understand that no sentient beings should go into gas chambers, and we put pigs in gas chambers even to this day, and that what is on your plate. That is the bacon, the sausage, and the ham. The other quote I want to draw your attention to is this one. We don't have post-traumatic stress disorder here. He's talking about in Palestine. The stress is never post. Now I want to draw your attention to what it's like to be an animal rights activist who knows what goes on. And every time that we see dead animals put in front of us or on signs as we drive our car past McDonald's and places like that, the stress never ends. Vegan phobia is everywhere in the world. There is so much anger and hatred towards vegans. Now, Russell Brand is also vegan, and people don't hate him. But the reason that they don't is because he rarely talks about it. In this interview, for example, and many others, he doesn't even bring it up. Now, sometimes he will say that he's vegan, but his wife is not vegan, and so he allows dead animals and their secretions into his home. This is the part that I think is not okay. Sure, anybody can be vegan and just sit quietly in their corner, but we must at all times bring up the animals in correlation, in relation to, at the same time as we bring up human rights issues, because they are intertwined. The planet is dependent on us in the sense that we are all intertwined, we are all interconnected into this interdependent world of existence. It's a web of existence that we all live in. And so it's really important that we don't forget the animals because they are the modern day slaves. Let's listen to this speech a little bit.
In yesterday's video where I talked about Israel and Palestine, I spoke of my personal feeling that people that aren't directly affected ought remain serene and calm and yield the floor to people that have personal investment and are closely and directly affected by these issues. That's why I've had a couple of conversations this week from, I suppose you'd have to say, different opposing sides of this very serious matter. Certainly a matter that I consider to be complex, but people on either side sometimes think and directly claim is a simple matter, as a sort of, I suppose, a further indication of how polarizing this matter is. The first of the conversations that took place on my podcast, Under the Skin, is with Dr. Gabor Maté, the therapist and writer, physician, and I would say sort of modern day shaman. But furthermore, and significantly with regards to this matter, he is a Holocaust survivor. Many of his family members were killed in the Holocaust. He had this to say about the situation in Israel now. Is one of the most beautiful, profound and effective things I've ever seen anybody say about this conflict, and I fail to see how anybody could. I think anybody who sees it will be deeply moved by Gabor Maté's wisdom and truth, his directness and his passion and his compassion.
Now, before we go on, I did research on Gabor Maté to try to find out if he is vegan. such as Russell Brand is, but I couldn't find any evidence of it, which seems really inconsistent with his morals. He does seem like a good guy. He does seem like a very compassionate doctor. He lives in Canada. He's Canadian. But let's just see what he has to say. And let's always keep in mind as we talk about the Palestinians and the Israelis and try to think about the victimization, and is there victimization going on regarding the animals in these two countries as well? And can everybody come together somehow to solve this problem so that there are no slaves, so that there are no jails, that there are no bars put between countries and between sentient beings? Just keep it in mind.
This is one of the issues that's closest to my heart, and it has been for a long time. So, you know my history, I don't have to repeat it, but I'm personally a Holocaust survivor as an infant. I barely survived. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz, and most of my extended family was killed. That's my personal background. I grew up ashamed of my Jewishness. In Hungary, after the war, I was still bullied for being Jewish. And I remember one of my friends coming to my rescue once saying, "Leave him alone, it's not his fault that he's Jewish." It's a fault, but it's not his fault. This was the defense. So I grew.
I'm not sure that that's what was meant by that comment. It's like saying it's not your fault you have gray hair. It's a fault. It's not a fault. I'm not sure that Gabor is being really fair in that statement of what somebody said.
Grew up with that. My grandfather, a physician and an author, by the way, who died in Auschwitz, was a good friend of Vladimir Jabotinsky, who was one of the major Zionist leaders, and the founder of the party that became Likud, the current government of Israel. So that's my family, and this is my background. In my teenage years in Canada, I became a Zionist. This dream of the Jewish people resurrected in their historical homeland, and the barbed wire of Auschwitz being replaced by the boundaries of a Jewish state with a powerful army. I find it liberating. It was exhilarating to believe in that dream. And I absorbed all that perspective and all that point of view, and I really believed in it. And then I found out that it wasn't exactly like that. That in order to make this Jewish dream a reality, we had to visit a nightmare on the local population. You couldn't, there was a Zionist slogan called a land without a people for a people without a land. But there was no there was no land without a people. There was people living there who'd been living there for hundreds and years or even longer. As a matter of fact, if you want to hear something really interesting, and David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, actually subscribed to this. He said this, who are the Palestinians? Because the Jews in Roman times, all of them never left Palestine. Many of them stayed there. And some of them, hundreds of years later, converted to Islam. So guess who the Palestinians are?
Isn't that interesting? So when you talk about these two countries being consistently at war, in reality, they're almost like cousins. They share so much history and so much bloodlines as well.
In some ways, they might be descendants of ancient Jews. They are cousins, to say the least, no matter how you look at it. And and there's no way you could have ever created a Jewish state without oppressing and expelling the local population, which is what they did in 1947, beginning in 1947, and first of all with British Empire protection, but they did this, and then in 1948, Jewish Israeli historians, have shown without a doubt that the expulsion of the Palestinians was persistent, It was pervasive, it was cruel, it was murderous.
Like a genocide, just trying to get rid of a people.
And with deliberate attempt. So that's what's called the Nakba in Arabic, the disaster or the catastrophe. Now in Canada, there's a law that you cannot deny the Holocaust. I don't believe in such laws, by the way.
He doesn't believe in the law that says that you cannot deny the Holocaust, and he's a Jewish man. I guess, like me, he doesn't believe that we should ban speech. I don't deny that there was a Holocaust. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows that there was one. But it's interesting that he says that as a Jewish man. I'd like to know more. I would like to interview him, actually.
But in Israel, you're not allowed to mention the Nakba, even though it was at the very basis of the foundation of the state. So once I became aware of all this, I was, okay, well, yeah, we created this beautiful dream, but we imposed a nightmare on somebody else. And then I visited the occupied.
I think this is what he's getting at when he was talking about somebody calling him a Jew or trying to make him feel bad for being Jewish when he was younger. Like, here's the kid, he's just born out of a mother and father, whatever country he's put in or whatever religion his parents tell him he is, he's innocent. Again, not that being Jewish is a crime, of course not. But it reminds me of when I was little too. When I was 9 years old in grade 4, somebody said to me that they thought I looked Jewish. Some kid in school. They said I thought I was, no, they said somebody asked me, was I Jewish because I supposedly had a Jewish nose. And then somebody else said, no, she's a Nazi because my last name is of German descent. And so I went home and I said to my parents, what does that mean? What's a Nazi? Like, I felt guilty. I felt guilty and I'd done nothing wrong. And this brings me back to this other issue that I often discuss on this channel, which is this idea of dark-skinned people calling veganism white veganism and separating us all by color. I just think it's wrong. And I think it's wrong that we consistently have to decide between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I don't get it why they don't just open the borders and just elect a government together and just live in peace. But right now it's just terrible. The Palestinians are being kept in confined places. They can't leave and come as they please, and this is terrible. This is what we do to animals. It's not okay to do it to animals. It's not okay to do it to the Palestinian people.
Territories, Russell, during the first Intifada. I cried every day for 2 weeks at what I saw. The brutality of the occupation, the petty harassment, the murderousness of it.
So he's talking about as a Jewish person going to visit Palestine and what he saw, the abuse that the Palestinians were going through.
The burning down of Palestinian or cutting down of Palestinian olive groves, the denial of water rights, the humiliations. And this went on, and it's much worse now than it was then. So this is the background. And it couldn't have been in any other way. Because again, you couldn't have created that exclusive Jewish state without oppressing or expelling the local population.
Many of you know that I often talk about Ben Shapiro, who is somebody who is considered to be right-wing. He has a show called The Daily Wire. He works on YouTube. He makes lots of videos. And he's an intelligent guy. And he does say a lot of things that I agree with. But he also brings religion into things often, and I don't agree with that. I don't think that we should constantly bring up religion as a way to separate us. And Ben Shapiro speaks very, very firmly that he thinks that the rights of the Jewish people are being violated. And Gabor here, Gabor Maté, is in contradiction of him. He doesn't agree with what Ben Shapiro is saying. And I find this talk by Gabor Maté to be really enlightening and really eye-opening.
It's the longest ethnic cleansing operation in the 20th and 21st centuries. It's still going on. And who are these people in Gaza? Now, you have to go to Gaza. You have to go there to really appreciate it. It's a small area where there are these multiple hundreds of thousands of people. Who are those people? The direct children or grandchildren of the people that were expelled from Israel.
Innocent people, children and grandchildren who had nothing to do with anything.
What is now Israel? Now, here's the outrage. And I'd like your Zionist friend in the States to tell me this. I, as a Jew, I could land in Tel Aviv tomorrow and demand citizenship under the law of the right of return. But my Palestinian friend in Vancouver, Hannah Kawas, who was born in Jerusalem, can't even visit. Now, if I have the right of return after 2,000 years, if that history is even the way it is, which is itself questionable, but let's assume that it is. If I have the right to return after 2,000 years, how come Hannah hasn't got the right to return after 70 years?
Yeah, that's wrong. That doesn't make any sense.
So what sense does it? No. So who's Gaza? This desperate, blockaded. Let me stop again. Am I talking too long about this? I'm sorry.
No.
This is so important to me, and I know so much about it that I don't even know where to stop.
No, carry on, Gabor, please.
So then you have these miserable people packed into this horrible, people call it the world's largest outdoor prison, which is what it is. Incredible poverty, 50% unemployment. Now Hamas is an Islamic...
50% unemployment. Just think about that. Every second home that you see, there's somebody in there who is who's not working, unable to work, can't find a job. That's a lot of poverty. That's a lot of kids who must be going hungry and don't have bare necessities. It's very sad.
Organization that was originally encouraged by Israel and supported by Israel as a counterweight to the secular Palestine Liberation Organization, which Israel didn't want to deal with. And given those conditions, of course people will go for extremist leadership. That's what people do when they're miserable and hopeless and deprived of any possibility whatsoever.
They go for extremist leadership when they are hopeless and they are poor and they don't have money. So that's the type of person that they will vote into government. Does that sound familiar at all? Sometimes we also are in situations like that within Canada or within the United States, or England or anywhere actually, where suddenly you realize, oh my God, they voted that person in? Like, why? How did that happen? Well, it's because people are really upset about what's going on and they feel like they need an extremist to speak out on their behalf. Sometimes extremists get attention, and that's not a bad thing. But we need extremists who are kind. We need, getting back to animal rights activists, we need animal rights activists who are willing to speak out on behalf of the animals all the time. Every time that there is an issue on the table regarding human rights, regarding the animals, regarding the earth, we need animal rights activists to be there at the forefront saying, excuse me, what about the animals? Who's defending the animals here? What would they say if they could speak? How are we treating their environment and their bodies? Are we stealing from them? Are we stealing any items from them, such as their milk or their honey? Are we exploiting them by riding them, putting them in circuses, or putting them in places like SeaWorld? Are we exploiting their bodies by raping them, forcing them to be pregnant? Are we kidnapping their babies? If we don't like the crimes of stealing and rape and kidnapping and murder, then it should be the same across the board for all sentient beings.
You don't have to support Hamas policies to stand up for Palestinian rights. That's a complete falsity. But there were free elections in Gaza, monitored by international community. They were declared to be the freest elections ever held in the Arab world. And Hamas happened to win. And when Hamas won that election, Israel and the United States immediately organized a military coup against them, which Hamas defeated.
So places like the United States want free elections. They want places around the world to have democracy. But when they did have democracy, they had fair elections. And Hamas, which is considered to be a group that is not always so nice, but anyway, they got elected. Then suddenly they started putting sanctions on the country.
For which the punishment was this blockade that deprives Hamas of, not Hamas, but Gaza, of food, of medical supplies, of sufficient water. I could go on and on and on and on. And then you have this conflict. And then every time there's a conflict, Israel mows the lawn. That's the expression they use. You know what they call it? They call it mowing the lawn, by which they mean the mass murder of Palestinian civilians. Now, is it true that the Gazans shoot rockets into Israel, killing innocent civilians? Yes, it is. Do I support that? No, I don't. But when it comes to the death of innocent civilians, Israel killed 20,000 Lebanese civilians in 1982.
20,000 Lebanese civilians.
Using illegal weapons like cluster bombs in a war that had no justification whatsoever. I could go on and on and on and on, except I'll say that the disproportion of power and responsibility and oppression is so markedly on one side that if you take the worst thing you can say about Hamas, multiplied by 1,000 times, and it still will not meet the Israeli repression and killing and dispossession of Palestinians.
So we're not going to watch the whole thing because you can watch it on your own, but I think you get the general idea. So what we've seen is we've seen Russell Brand, who is a vegan and who is taking the time to give his platform to Gabor Maté. Gabor Maté, who is a physician and somebody who cares about children and also works a lot with people with addiction. He's retired now, but he is born as a Jew and he's speaking out against the state of Israel. I also wanted to point out to you the quotes. Let's look at them again. It's not what you know, it's what you could know if you wanted to. We're talking about this with regard to people that had a feeling that they knew what the Nazis were doing, but were too afraid to look and never got involved, and they should have. In the same way that we should get involved with what's going on with the animals today, it is everyone's moral responsibility to not pay for the rape, the torture, and the murder of animals. Everyone should strive to be as vegan as possible. Another one here. We don't have post-traumatic stress disorder here because the stress is never post. Now, you didn't actually hear him say that because I don't want to take the time to show you the whole interview because it's good for you to see it on Russell Brand's channel. But basically, he's talking about in Palestine and what's going on there and how the trauma just never ends because they are in a confined area, such as the same way that we treat billions of animals in this world, treated terribly, unable to have free access to water and to move and to go wherever they want to. They are not allowed, and it's wrong. So when you're thinking about the world and the conflicts that are going on, try to always bring it back to the animals as well. Think about the human rights issues and how important it is for us to solve these problems in a peaceful way, but also think about the animals. And let's not exploit them. Let's not use them as slaves in the background that we don't see, but they are the ones that people are eating, and that is just wrong, to eat the bodies of anyone. We don't like stealing. We don't want anyone to steal anyone's land. Let's not steal their bodies as well. Nobody's body. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. It's a little notification button somewhere down here, plus the notification, so you'll get a bing anytime that a video is going as a preview, and you can type something in the comment section. Thank you so much to all the moderators who are always there trying to educate people. And remember, in the main comment section, to continue the education about veganism. I encourage you all to post what documentaries are important for people to see, because Remember, it's not what you know, it's what you could know if you wanted to. So go ahead and watch those documentaries. Watch Earthlings, watch Dominion Movement. Don't be afraid. Be brave, be vegan, and start now. Thanks for watching.